It's July 2015 and stuff has happened. We're a little over halfway done with the year, and the theme of the year so far seems to be things that are halfway done. Big games are still coming out incomplete, early access is moving on to the consoles, 15 minutes of an E3 conference focused on a Kickstarter, and just like every other year before it, people have had a lot more fun getting angry than they have had getting happy. But who can blame them as a gamer? Browsing the Steam storefront starting to feel a lot like picking out the prettiest knife to get stabbed with, and in general, companies big and small are getting more and more comfortable with spending their money on PR rather than quality control in the first place. But, just like every other year, a lot of cool things have happened. Some great things have come out, and we still have a lot of great things coming up on the horizon. So here at the midpoint of the year, I'm going to do something I haven't done before on my channel. I'm going to make a list, and I'm going to fill it out. A mid-year roundup of sorts. You know, some stuff I loved and some stuff I hated. Starting with... my favorite quest so far this year has been Bloody Baron. I think it's actually a quest line, but, you know, semantics. It's from The Witcher 3. I'll try not to ruin many of its twists and turns, but it's a mini-epic of a quest that with a bit more exposition could be film-worthy. Its central character, the Bloody Baron, is definitely the most fascinating aspect of the quest. At the beginning, it seems like he's going to function as a hate sponge, working as a catalyst to send the story onward, keeping the player excited by the idea of defeating, killing, or just generally undermining his rule. But eventually he settles into a sympathetic role, or, well, at least as sympathetic as you can be towards someone as horrible as him. This happens after you tear him down a few notches and just learn more about his motivations, but it's just a masterful and mature use of gaming as a storytelling medium, forcing the player to work through some exceptionally dark territory to serve a larger end goal. The thing that makes me fear the most for the future are Amiibos, but more so how warmly people are responding to them. I know speaking ill of Nintendo can be terribly received on the internet, but the biggest problem here isn't what buying an Amiibo gets the customer. It's more about what it doesn't get those that decide not to buy the damn things. It's only going to get worse as Nintendo's library grows and more on-disc content is hidden behind a really steep and impractical paywall. I could talk about how much these things frustrate me for an hour, so I'll stop now. My favorite weapon has been Ludwigs' Holy Blade, a spectacular weapon in Bloodborne whose entire idea is simple, but is an absolute blast to use. When compared to some of the crazier weapons you find in the game, like a spear with a massive gun strapped to it, the Holy Blade seems unexceptional, but it's just such an endlessly effective and sleekly designed weapon that it stole the show. My least favorite weapon has to be Hatori's sword from The Witcher 3. It is this really long quest. You find this master craftsman who's left his line of work and you're supposed to bring him back into it. And you do a lot of errands for him and you finally get him to muster up the confidence to come back to the trade that he really loves. And you wait for a few days for him to craft his masterpiece. It reminded me a lot of The Legend of Zelda when you gave that broken sword to the Goron and skipped time to get that massive thing. And he gives it to you and the drums are rolling and it's worthless. Maybe not for everyone, but for me it was under-leveled and it didn't do any damage and I couldn't even sell the thing for much money. But yeah, that was really disappointing. Off gaming, my favorite album this year has to be Jamie XX's In Color. It's a sparkling, clean collection of electronic music, and one hell of a debut. It's a statement of purpose from a producer that's kind of unparalleled. Maybe since something like Flying Lotus's Cosmogramma, I've seen a producer just open up like this. It's very clean, but with repeated listens you find this detail and attention to the craft that you don't really see in a lot of other producers. One of the most notable things from this album for me is his use of the steel drum and just his respect of such a culturally bound instrument. The steel drum usually makes me think of some tacky tiki bar where the use of it is borderline racist, but here he uses it like an instrument. I mean, it's varied, almost kind of sad sounding. It's a really awesome album. My biggest surprise so far this year has been Duck Game, which is the silly and laser-focused multiplayer game that really shines when you're playing locally with friends. It's competitive fun in the best way, and it never feels unfair at all, especially not unfair enough to be irritating, even though you die a lot and you lose a lot. It offers enough strategic depth on top of that, hiding behind its simple gameplay, to keep mastery always a little out of reach, and you constantly find new ways of movement, like dragging chainsaws along the ground or shooting in the opposite direction to give you a little boost up in the air. It's a really fun game, highly recommended to play with friends. Best graphics. Initially, I should say that I could care less for realism. We all know that creative design choices are better than attempts at photorealism in general, most obviously when looking at older games. Wind Waker is going to age better than its contemporaries, so I always favor distinctive style over lifelike style. With that said, Apotheon has to be the best looking game I've seen this year. They really took the ball and ran with it, stunning in how they maintained a consistent style while offering a number of thematic changes even. There's only so much you could think you could do with this pottery aesthetic. Even more so when I started focusing on the game's details, things begin just to blow me away. You see scratches and cracks on the surface of the screen, and you can see light reflecting off the background, like it's ancient art really come to life. My biggest disappointment this year, and to keep the Nintendo bashing rolling, has to be Codename STEAM. It seemed like something grown in a lab specifically for me. A turn-based strategy game developed by the Fire Emblem guys, with silly historical figures headed up by Nintendo. It was one of those things that seemed impossible to mess up, even if some of the aspects of the game were like terrible. There were so many avenues in which the game could find success that I didn't really see failure as a possibility. Startlingly, the game just wasn't very good. Instead of a number of excellent cogs in a steampunk machine, they were all mediocre or even worse, with the cherry on top being the absolutely ridiculous time between turns, mostly spent staring at flat wall textures panning across the screen. Still, it really hurts me to think about what that could have been. My favorite boss has to be Gherman from Bloodborne. He's really just the perfect final boss to me, especially in an action game. What I feel is the best possible outcome for a final boss in an action game is it functioning like a final exam. I know that sounds boring, but it's the best way I can put it. Kind of a test on the fundamentals you've learned, and here this was the perfect test on the fundamentals of Bloodborne. Quick dodging and well-timed attacks were required for success, and it was set in a sprawling field of gorgeous blooming flowers with sparse orchestral music playing neutrally in the background. Not really cheering or booing, just waiting for the inevitable. My least favorite boss was definitely the end of the Old Blood. I can't remember if it had a name, just that huge mummy zombie thing. It's just a mess of incomplete ideas, especially on higher difficulties. It's one of those tired-ass half-circle, big monsters slamming down his fists fights that you've seen so many times. And it's kind of like it was designed for a different game, one with a third-person camera and a dodge button. It just wasn't fun, and it basically recommended a cheap strategy. My favorite episode of this year's Bob's Burgers was definitely Runaway Club, the one where they had to do that fashion show. I thought that was really funny. The enemy design that stood out the most to me, I guess, in terms of aesthetics, not so much in terms of like the actual encounter and how fun it was to fight, was the fluorescent flower. Sadly, also in Bloodborne. I'm sorry for mentioning it so many times. That game is just really sticking out in my head. These things are just stunning to see. These huge insect-like creatures with a budding flower sprouting from where you would assume the head should be, and their entire body is just lined with writhing legs, and the underside is composed of rows and rows of teeth. They are even more interesting when you kill one and watch as the entire body disappears, and leaving only that flower collapsed on the ground, which was clearly acting as, I guess, the host of this nightmarish thing. Crazy, crazy design. My favorite mobile game, I haven't played many, is definitely Divide by Sheep. I hope it came out this year. I don't really know about release dates on mobile games. It's a math game, kind of, about getting sheeps and wolves on lifeboats. Things get grim and hilarious later on, sometimes requiring you to cut them in half and rebuild them on the raft, or purposefully kill them to complete levels. I've heard You Must Build a Boat is pretty great, and that might have taken this award if I'd played it. I usually try to avoid match 3 games, but that one seems to do it really well. And speaking of doing tired ideas really well, The game that kind of took an old idea and twisted around the best for me must have been Hand of Fate on its approach to roguelike systems. The developers here looked back at the foundation, the very beginning of RPG gaming, and the creation of Hand of Fate, and in the process they found a really compelling and refreshing idea to this mixture of hack and slash gameplay with random roguelike generation, all being carried by this charismatic dungeon master that speaks to you in between rounds. It's a wonderful idea, and it's just as buried in tradition as it was exploratory. Sadly, there just wasn't enough variety, nor a good enough balance of difficulty to really take the game from good to great. The idea was awesome regardless. Best paid DLC is definitely Mario Kart 8, the DLC Pack 2. I would have chosen the first, but I don't think it came out this year. I think both of those have been extremely well handled. Even though I disagree with a lot of things Nintendo's doing, the DLC in that game was really well done. Destiny, House of Wolves. Destiny has just been a blast to watch. I mean, a train wreck. PR disaster after PR disaster, terrible choices. They clearly just chopped up the game a while ago and have just been slowly trickling out pieces of meat to keep the fans alive. It's just gross. Best user interface from this year has to be Besiege. A lot of games get hung up on trying to infuse character of the game into the menus, HUDs, and so on. And this is where companies can mess up a lot of times, and it's a huge failing in games like The Witcher, especially the original. I mean, if you look at that menu, it's just so busy, even though it actually is more functional than the second and thirds menus. Even though they look better, they might even function worse. And then other times you see companies head in the opposite direction, and they end up like Skyrim, which focused on just the complete removal of character in favor of just simplicity, but it was horrible to navigate and took far too long to get around in. And then you have something like Besiege, which pulls off simple UI with a grace you rarely encounter. If you have ever ventured into an Adobe editing suite, any of them like Photoshop or Illustrator, you'll feel right at home here. It's got clean lines and these sans serif fonts, solid blocks of color conveying information to the player. The best UIs to me are the ones that stay out of your way, while also being constructed to provide constant access to things you need. Besiege does both really well, and even though it's initially a bit obtuse, which, games about building stuff are gonna be, after an hour of play it feels natural, and menu surfing is responsive and attractive, but most importantly it's sensibly organized, and completely devoid of distracting stylistic hang-ups. The worst user interface, and I'm really happy they re-released these games so I can complain about them. And I haven't played the most recent one, but Borderlands 2, 1 and 2, which were released in the Handsome Jag collection, I think. I'm really just talking about Borderlands 2, which is the one I've spent the most time with. Playing these games on a PC and trying to logically navigate the menu is horrible. It's terrible at giving the player information, it's a nightmare to navigate, and it just seems built around using a controller. But even then, if you use a controller, if you just give up and you say, hey, I don't care that much about aiming, I'd so much rather make these menus more bearable, it still isn't that much better. At some resolutions, your character will even lock entire panels of information, which is already a horrible decision to have them separated like this. God, you can tell they were focusing on looks, and at least it isn't hideous, but that doesn't save it from being a slog to interact with. My favorite movie was Inside Out. Close seconds Mad Max, but we aren't talking about close seconds here. My favorite was definitely Inside Out. It was adorable. This is a hard one to explain. My favorite game to play while listening to podcasts or while watching Bob's Burgers, generally just play on mute and relax, has been Cities Skylines this year. It's just really nice to sit back and manage a city. It also pays back what you give it. If you want to actually pay complete attention to the details and craft this immaculate society, you can, or you can take it slow and easy, and it caters to both. Worst game title. This is a tie between Rise of the Tomb Raider, which, those two words just shouldn't be together. Tied with that is something that I can hardly pronounce, Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth 1. I don't know if you pronounce the 1. And there's a semicolon in there. It's like they weren't looking at the keyboard and they just shipped it anyway. I assume if it's a series, I haven't done any research. If that's a series, I probably just sound really ignorant. But man, that is just a terrible title. That semicolon, that really bothers me. Irrationally bothers me. But that's that. It's been a pretty fun year. Of course, I'll be making one of these at the end of the year, maybe a little less casual, maybe not even the same list. Might have to change the list, add some stuff, remove some stuff, I can't really decide. Hey, it's my first time doing this, and years are long, and that's the main reason I did this. I wanted to cut it in half. Things get forgotten. Remember, was it this year's Academy Awards? Remember when they were giving Grand Budapest Hotel nominations and you were like, didn't that come out like 7 years ago? But no, it had just come out earlier that year. Just got swamped by other releases. Great movie though. Regardless, thanks everyone. I've loved making these. It's been a great first 6 months. A lot of my videos have been serious, so I decided to make one that just wasn't at all. I'm humbled by the people that watch my stuff and comment, take times to start conversations or get angry at some of the things I say. Hopefully you all stick around and have a great rest of the year. I will try to do so as well. Thank you again for watching.